Everybody, very interesting TNA Biz Brief we've got going on this morning. So many comments coming in from Twitter. So I'm going to read a couple of them to you. Peter, I hope that you're listening as well, and perhaps you can filter some of these comments into your conversation and some questions that are posed as well. So our first tweet comes from Kay Sehwale. Kay writing in saying to us, in my humble opinion, South African media must stop pretending editorial neutrality. Admit that you support the ANC, the DA, and your toy soldiers, etc. All right, that's the opinion of Kay Sehwale writing to us at Morning Live SABC. Another one from the Food Consumer Action, that's what they're called. We have some good journalists in South Africa, but are they permitted to actually print the truth? Hashtag advertising revenue. There's another question too. Perhaps we can pose that to the print media as well as broadcast media as well. Tabo Letsiso saying, freedom of speech was denied to media and the masses by the parliament via the secrecy bill. Flawed media due to a flawed democracy. Well, there you go. That's exactly what it's saying. Poloko Motswapong saying, every talk that involves state regulation of the media, it scares me. Well, yeah, indeed it does. I think it scares most South Africans, Poloko, but thank you very much for writing into us as well. Jacques Cubido saying, monopoly of Naspers on the media must be broken. They have too much power. That's according to Jacques. And then just people just commenting. Alice Puane saying, what is the definition of good news and bad news? It should be the same version from everyone. All right, well, there you go. There's a nice question perhaps to pose. What is good news? What is bad news? And how do we get the same version from everyone? I think it's impossible because people's opinions are there. But nonetheless, let's ask our panelists and let's go back to our TNA. There's lots more from us when you're ready, Peter.
All right, Leanne, thank you very much indeed. Unfortunately, the people here couldn't hear some of the questions that you raised, but I've written them down and I will get some responses for those tweets that have come through. But just before we carry on, we do have the Minister of Small Business here, Lindiwe Zulu, who's sitting at table number 6. If we could get a microphone to table number 6. A minister has a question. If you could just stand up, Minister, so we can get a microphone to you. Looking at your colors, I'm wondering which party you support.
Well, I'm the walking, talking billboard of that party. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning and start this conversation, because my view, we just at the beginning of a real conversation that should have taken place a very long time ago. Now that we're here, my question is, I see and respect the people who are sitting at the panel, but the question for me is, the people that are also behind you, when are we ever going to get the real owners of the media in South Africa to come out and have this conversation? That's my first question. My second question is, do journalists really consider that they have a serious responsibility towards building this new country that we are trying to build? It's not a responsibility of government alone or civil society. It makes me feel exactly the same when I think about big business in South Africa, who in the main do not come out into platforms like this to talk about the challenges of South Africa, but they talk about it behind closed doors, and the finger is always pointed one way when it comes to the challenges that are facing South Africa. When are we going to have them on that platform also responding to our questions?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I want to get a couple of more questions and then we can interrogate them all. JJ Tabane, table number 14, if you could stand up, we'll get a microphone to you. And then Zizi Kodwa, if you're still here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, a few years ago, a report by a foundation called the Konrad Adenauer Foundation singles out ownership concentration as the biggest threat to press freedom. And so I would like to hear what the panel would say about the blurring of lines between the commercial and the editorial that then can tend to influence how media reports and therefore how media transforms. So that's really the first thing. The second thing is that, you know, if you want to annoy most members of the press, say to them, look, you've got to play your part in rebuilding South Africa in a way that takes information as empowerment to people. They'll tell them that's not our business. Our business is just to be a watchdog. I think that dichotomous role needs to be analyzed. I think the media is doing a pretty fine job as watchdog, and I think everyone agrees that, you know, some of the corruption scandals and so on that have come to pass, you would not have known them if the media was not so vigilant. But on the other extreme, how many media have taken the time to just educate their readers about what is the National Development Plan that is often stated as a soundbite? I mean, this is a 400-page document that determines South Africa's future over the next 30 years.
All right.
But if you go and actually focus on what newspapers have done to educate people about that, and many others, the NHI, many others, you'd find that there is a lack. There's more concentration on watchdog, less concentration on nation building in a form of information dissemination.
I'm going to interrupt because I'm going to beg you all, please, if you could almost think as if you're on Twitter when you're asking your questions. Try and use 140 characters to ask your questions or make your point. And I know that's going to be difficult for you, Zizi Kodo, table number 5.
Thank you very much. I think the first point to make is that we must welcome the statement by Stephen Grootes. I think the admissions today, thanks to Stephen Motale for having allowed us to create a space for Grootes to make such admissions. There could be many in the media space who really were trapped in the narrative that they would want to come up and apologize. And I think let's create more of these platforms. But the second point I think that comes quite very clear is that nobody is immune from influence, including the media practitioners. They are influenced. I like the point made by the chair of the subcommittee, Lindiwe, that perhaps the point we must ask at some point, because some of us media practitioners may appropriate an obligation on us to defend the shareholder. It may be important at some point to take to the shareholder, because the shareholder has got probably given the ownership patterns of the media in South Africa. We may have that responsibility, which is another question asked earlier. I want to quickly to deal with the question which was asked about why the media in South Africa at times gets influenced. We just had a case, not only 702 and others, that consciously took a decision in the last election to support a political party. Not only was it that, even after that, there were issues about some of the senior journalists in the media house who did some depictions of people who voted for the ANC in a manner that described them as brainless. I don't want to use the words that were used. Very racist. And I think that was repeated by another party which the station supported in Parliament, which later was withdrawn, describing people who voted the ANC again as brainless. The Daily Dispatch, the regional paper, just to give an example how media gets influenced. We just won a case 10-0 against Daily Dispatch as the ANC from a press ombudsman. The editor stands up in front of the panel, says, I had to write this headline with pictorial images of the ANC leadership, which have nothing to do with whatever was reported. He says, I had to write the story because this issue was talked about in the township. He was asked by the panel, did you do independent evaluation of information? No. The answer is because the story, it was talked about. So it's a gossip, but it's in the headlines. This is what makes news in South Africa. The gossip, because bashing of government, being anti-government, anti-state, because anything that has got state control, it has got a suspicion. That's why a regulation in terms of the media, if you talk about media regulation, you're talking about state, as though broadcasting is state controlled, and many things that are controlled, they don't have any state influence. So in the media itself, media is anti-transformation of itself. That's why you'll continue to have monopolies, such as Naspers, that have got big voices that defends them.
All right, Mr. Konrad, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so a number of points that have been raised, and I just want to get very quick comments from all of you on the things that have been raised. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Motale, actually. Just very quickly on anything that the questions that have been raised, if you could just add 30 seconds each, maximum.
Okay. I'm not going to sit here and say we are not biased. You know the same journalist who resigned, the former political editor of The Citizen? His story is a very, very sad one. You know, in journalism, protection of a source is a golden rule. But in this letter, there's clear evidence that a source was compromised just to protect a particular political party. This young man was investigating wrongdoing within the DA, and it was only him and the editor who knew who the source was. The story was suppressed, and within minutes, the then DA leader, Helen Zille, called the source to reprimand the source and threaten the source. That cannot be journalism. It has to go.
Okay. All right. Stephen Grootes.
I'm sorry to hear about what's happening at the Citizen. It does. I mean, it sounds awful. No, I'm being sorry. I'm being serious.
It's not only the Citizen.
Yeah.
I'm just being honest. It's happening across the board.
Well, you don't know that it's happening.
It is happening, Stephen.
Well,
you just have got to go through all the papers.
You don't have evidence of that.
I have plenty of evidence. You need to give us 6 hours.
Okay. Stephen.
I just would want to point out a few things. JJ Ongepotse, if I may speak frankly, you talk about the blurring of the lines between commercial and editorial imperatives, and it just doesn't happen. I mean, I've read news bulletins that have spoken about the safety of one bank, and that bulletin has been sponsored by that bank. And in the bulletin has been sponsored by the bank saying it's very safe, and the main lead story in the bulletin has been about a robbery at that bank. I mean, it doesn't happen. If we want to talk about blurring of lines between shareholders and editorial, I mean, I'm afraid we have to go back to Auckland Park and the SABC. That's really where we need to look at. And Minister Zulu and Zizi, I think we'll see each other later, Zizi. I do want to talk about the ownership of the media. I mean, in my case, my main employer, Prime Media Broadcasting, is owned by the Mine Workers Investment Fund. It's owned by the National Union of Mine Workers. I'm sure if you see the Secretary General later, you'll be able to have a conversation with them about it. And it's right to bring up cases where the media got things wrong. I've got no problem with that. I'm happy, as I've seen, to apologize for things where we got things wrong. It would be nice if politicians also sometimes accepted, of all parties, that often they play a role of trying to obfuscate the truth. They try and stop us from getting to the information. And we mustn't forget that when we talk about, the media interrogating news events and statements, we mustn't forget that politicians often, across the board, in every democracy, in every party, will play a deliberate role in trying to stop us from getting to the truth. And where you see a big mistake, often there's a little bit of that as well. I'm not going to blame politicians for our mistakes. I'm just saying we need to be aware of that too.
That's 30 seconds then. Ferial, 30 seconds. We've got these monopolies that are, and this is a tweet that's come through as well, and they also concerned about the advertising revenue affecting the quality of the journalism. But also respond to what you've heard.
Can I respond to what Minister Zulu asked? I feel a personal responsibility, and this goes for most journalists I know, to build a country. I feel impassioned by that, to be part of that process of, have been part of enjoying the freedom and now seeing that this country can be all that it can be. I feel impelled by that. And I think you see many, many examples from Prime Media's excellent Lead SA to sitting on a panel like this, which opens up discussions among South Africans who may not always be able to speak to each other. I can name you hundreds of examples like those happening across the media. So I think our fourth estate, we know our role very well. But may I also say that following the precious public rand is as much an act of building the country. Investigative journalism, uncovering corruption, those are also parts of our responsibility to building our country. There's nothing unpatriotic in doing that, I would have.
All right. Mr. Motsoeneng earlier on said that the quality of teaching at our tertiary institutions, have you been feeling that in your newsroom, that the candidates that are coming through into your newsrooms are not up to the mark?
Not at all. Just on Saturday as we finished, I looked at the work of Lindiwe Zulu. 3 years of reporting on Marikana. She finalized that work by going back 3 years later, finding the little boy who'd been born days after his dad was killed at Marikana, telling the story of his life now, telling the story of the doctors who were at the scene, telling the story of the widows left behind. I see young people doing brilliant work all the time like that. So this idea that juniorization is a bad thing, actually I see young black journalists doing the work of very deep commitment. And I think personally that Mr. Motsoeneng was highly insulting to any number of brilliant journalism teachers and professors in the room here, and also to the work of Mr. Jotlal, where I think he's made us a much more responsible journalistic corps than anything I've seen in 25 years of working.
Okay, Moegsien.
I just want to respond to Stephen on 2 points. Firstly, the Daily Dispatch memo I see is being retweeted. The audience here and viewers at home can make up their own mind when they read that memo whether it's a hoax or not. It is self-explanatory and clearly emanated from in a newsroom. My worry about Stephen is he seems to be saying that there's nothing wrong. Our media is absolutely fine, and that we just continue on the basis that we have been on for the last period, and therefore, you know, everything is hunky-dory. He doesn't seem to have picked up the anger in certain sections of our society, in political parties. Doesn't seem to be cognizant of the fact that there's a urban-rural divide here where our media is very, very urban-focused and forget about 50% of the population that live in our rural areas. He seems to be blind to quite a lot of things, which I think is going to get media into trouble in this country. Let me respond to just 1 or 2 points from the floor.
Very briefly.
On the issue of I think the Minister alluded to where are we going as a country and what is the role of media as we're going forward. Clearly, we need to begin to look at what kind of role we can play to build a society. Ferial touched on it, but let me raise a very, very controversial issue of our coverage of the Al-Bashir matter. Almost in unison, our media attacked the government for finding itself in what I would call a legal pickle. It signed the Rome Statute, and when Mr. Al-Bashir arrived here and a court made a certain ruling, we were in a dilemma. But our media, almost, as I say, in unison, attacked the government in terms of the way it is handling the matter. There's no way that this government could have arrested a sitting president of an African country, firstly. Secondly, let me agree with Mr. Malema in Parliament, what he said the other day. There's no way that we were going to waste and destroy 20 years of building up a relationship with the continent in order to satisfy some kind of an idea that we need to arrest a sitting president to take him to the ICC in The Hague. But our media failed to understand that there was an issue of national interest. Next month, Mr. Al-Bashir will arrive in New York to take part in the UN Assembly debate. I don't think the New York Times or the Washington Post will be calling on the United States to breach the protocols they have with the United Nations and arrest Al-Bashir. Because it is simply not in their national interest. And I think we, going forward as a media, must begin to debate what do we understand by the national interest and how do we play our role.
All right, but with all due respect, the Americans are not signatories to the Rome Statute, so they don't have to.
But they called on us to arrest Al-Bashir when the issue was very, very hot here.
Okay, Mr. Motsoeneng.
Yeah, you know, it's good to be here and listen to my colleagues here. I think you're on, Stephen. You see, you are always misleading people. I'm not, and I want to emphasize this because you are talking about the SABC. ANC is not deploying Hlaudi in the SABC. It has nothing to do with Hlaudi. I want to stress that. I have seen your book, I have read your book where you are saying ANC, they have deployed Hlaudi. That is misleading, and you don't have the facts on the table. People who have been appointing Hlaudi, some of them, they belong to certain parties that I can't mention here. White people. You know, it is misleading. Because for me, I have been appointed by different people. ANC has nothing to do with Hlaudi. But also I need to deal with the issue of SANEF, because it is very important that the SANEF change the way it operates. Because we have a serious problem. What kind of people who are serving in SANEF? You get old guards still serving at SANEF. They are not journalists anymore. But they still influence the direction of SANEF. And I'm happy that some of the SABC people are there. They are there to take over. So that they can change the mindset of SANEF, the way SANEF operates. And Stephen, you are right. We are in majority, so majority will rule there. So we should take over.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just...
But also coming to the issue of SABC, we are not apologetic about telling the good stories, about reflecting the country as it is, not putting propaganda. Because I have an issue. Some of us, we work for apartheid. I don't know how many of you work under apartheid. I don't know how do you know apartheid operated during those days, where you have someone sitting next to you telling you what to do. It is not happening in the SABC, and it will never happen. But what is important also, the mindset is very critical. And the mindset starts here. And I'm going to change your mindset. I need time with you so that you understand where this country is going to. And I'm not saying we should do propaganda, but I'm saying that we need to report the truth and the facts. But also, when it comes to young ones, you are saying I'm insulting young ones. I'm not insulting them. I'm saying they should not listen to the mindset that is misleading at the tertiary level, because I know what I'm talking about. I've got evidence. If people lecture about the South Africa and they even personalize about individual, you know, academics, they should not attack the individuals. They should attack the facts and come with solutions. But in those tertiary, most of them, they attack individual. You can see that they personalize these individuals. That is where I have a serious problem. But I'm happy that the guy from print media is honest, is coming. Whether you agree with him or you disagree, those are the facts that you know yourself.
All right, we're going to have to move on because time is not on our side, and I want to get through as many of these as possible. It's Ferial, I'm told that you can have quick response, 30 seconds if you want to respond to what
just on SANEF, which I think is a precious organization born in the democracy of South Africa. It's led by Mpumi Mkabela and Mosh Monari with Angela Quintel. So I'm not sure who this old guard is that tells everybody what to do. They are the ones who direct the organization.
Okay.
Sorry, can I respond? You see, it is not. You see, it is not about white or black. It's about the mentality. Because sometimes we have black people, but they are lost where they are. You see, because when you talk about transformation, I know people take color as, for me, it's the mindset of people, it's the mentality of people.
Right.
You know, it's not about the color. But she knows that there are old people who are sitting there. I went there and addressed SANEF. I saw them. I said, hey, man, I know this person 30 years ago. He's still here.
All right, okay. Let me move to the floor. Is Mr. Chloe here? Is Mr. Chloe here? If we could get a microphone to him. He's not. Oh, what a pity. I would have loved to have heard from him. All right, let's go to table number 16. Is that Kyobekile Musweo, table 16?
Ladies and gentlemen, I've got two questions, and I think
you've got time for one, so pick the one that you think is the most important.
One of which was partly answered, but what I need is confirmation. The SABC undoubtedly derives its mandate from the public of South Africa, about over 30 million active listeners and viewers of our daily content. And the question is, where does the print media derive its mandate from? Because surely it can't be from the public whose fathers and forefathers are being insulted on a daily or weekly basis. Secondly, is the issue of if the media is so transparent and ethical in their approach, what would then be the reason for them opposing the Media Appeals Tribunal if really they are professional in their approach and they know what they're doing?
All right, okay. Just before I get a response, Jimmy Mani, are you here? Yes, can I get a microphone to Jimmy?
Thank you.
Because the other side of this equation is the government has a vehicle in which it can express its opinion and its thoughts. I think you were responsible for starting Vukazenzele, the newspaper, that was to represent that story, that voice. And I'm just wondering, has this been able to counteract what is perceived to be anti-government information? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think indeed. First, let's start. My name is Mzwanele.
Okay.
Okay. That newspaper, Vukuzenzele, the only challenge I think within government quotas is just funding. I think we would appeal to government to fund that newspaper. Right now, I think it's only a monthly newspaper, but it should be a weekly newspaper for it to be able to counteract. But once I'm on the floor, I also have just a few questions. One question. I think it's important for media not to give a facade that it is objective, when in fact it is not. I mean, firstly, media gives the impression that the government must account to it, when in fact government has got parliament to account to it. Media must accept that it is a business for profit. It is not a body to account to. That's the first point. And then very briefly, I think, especially Stephen Grootes, I think it must be clear in South Africa that media has been misleading people. President Zuma and corruption have become synonymous. And the truth of the matter is that President Zuma, last time he was convicted in court was in 1963, and has not been convicted ever since, except by Stephen Grootes and the media, as it were. Why is it that Stephen Grootes can take some line? You see, I make the point that courts don't gossip. Why is it that Stephen Grootes takes some line and then puts his own interpretation, his own spin in it, and then conclude that President Zuma is corrupt from the judgments that he keeps quoting, when in fact there is no definitive judgment that links. Even public protector has not said President Zuma is corrupt. And lastly, JJ is wrong. JJ is wrong to say that the media has been responsible for unearthing corruption. The people that must get credit are actually the government officials that have been giving this information as source. These are the people that have got zero tolerance to corruption, not media. Thank you.
Mr. Mani. Quick responses. You have been mentioned in the...
Yes. Mzwanele, I mean, I think I need to respond directly. I've never said that President Jacob Zuma is guilty of corruption. I've never said it. What I've said many times is that there's a situation under which I suspect he may owe us, or he should, give us an explanation under oath of his financial relationship between Shabir Sheikh and himself. And he himself has been offered the opportunity to have his day in court and has used every legal right that he has, which is his right, to not have that opportunity. That's all I've said. I've never gone further than that. I've never said that he's corrupt. Never said it. When we talk about, government being responsible for uncovering corruption, it's simply not true. People hide things all the time. All the time. Thabo Mbeki said to religious leaders about Jackie Salibi, "Trust me." That was what he said. We trusted Thabo Mbeki, and what happened? Jackie Salibi was found guilty. This happens all the time. We can't trust people in government in any country in the world. This is not about the ANC or about South Africa. You can't trust people just to get on and do things, because people in power almost always, not always, but very often, try and use that power to their own ends. And to say that the media is afraid of a media appeals tribunal only because it's not doing its job properly, well then, would it be allowed, would you be happy for a police officer to follow you doing something every day with a video camera? Just because if you are afraid, you're saying that that's because you're going to do something wrong, that's the only reason you would object to that. Of course there can't be government regulation, because how can you trust a politician anywhere to regulate the media?
Okay, Ferial?
Just on the topic of, so where do you derive your credibility from? I think it's your readership and the public trust and the idea of a fourth estate, and from Section 16 of the Constitution. That's what enshrines free expression, and I think gives you the right to operate and to be responsible to a public.
Moegsien?
Well, I think print has been in existence about 100 years before broadcast in this country. So just in terms of its contribution to the overall historical development of this country, and Ferial is right, it's all about our readership. If you don't have readers and you don't have credibility with those readers, you don't have a mandate. But it's a pity Joe Tolway is not here, and that he responds maybe to the whole issue of
because
media
you're with
appeals.
Sanev.
I'm a member, and, and a founder member.
Founder member.
SANEF is a very important organization. SANEF has a very important role to play in terms of, presenting and representing a kind of a collective voice, especially, and which is, of course, my appeal today, that we need to engage government on a much more regular and a much more constructive basis. So SANEF is a very, very important instrument in going forward in doing that. But Joe Tolway would have responded today to, of course, the press council. And my earlier point in response to Stephen is that the industry is in a bit of a mess. The governing overarching body known as the PMSA is busy falling apart. It may not be in existence next year, under which the press council operates. Now, Joe Tolway and I want to encourage our viewers and audience here to take an interest trying to redraft the kind of basic constitution of the as a counter to a media appeal tribunal, which sent shivers up my spine. If we're talking about a government-funded something that politicians have brought about, I do worry about the implications for us as a media.
I have to take a quick break. Stephen Motale will come to you straight after that. We'll be back. We've got a few minutes left, so we'll look at your tweets again. Please stay with us. We're talking about the state of the media and the state of transformation after this.